Hey guys, welcome back to Embers and Ash. My name's Ashley, if you didn't know, and today I'm coming at you with another gardening video because 'tis the season. I have been putting so much of my energy into gardening and I'm really excited to share with you guys what I've been learning and specifically what I've been screwing up. That's what today's video is about, is all the mistakes that I've already made in the garden. And it's barely spring. So, like I go into each season with a lot of confidence, thinking I know what I'm doing, but I'm also trying new things and that comes with a lot of mistakes. And I also don't know everything. So I don't know why I think it's always going to work out. But I want to share with you guys the mistakes that I have made, so hopefully you won't do the same, or if you've already started doing these things, maybe you can backtrack. But before I get into that, I do want to thank today's sponsor, who is Skillshare. If you didn't know, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for curious and creative people. But what you may not know is that Skillshare has hundreds of career-focused classes too. Traditional jobs are not a one-size-fits-all, and Skillshare is here to help design a career that fits you. This year, you guys know I've been really focusing on my role as a mother, but I still want to have my career going forward as well. So my focus has been on time management and prioritizing tasks to try and fit both my life as a mother and my job in. And Skillshare is here to help me achieve those goals with classes on time management like Personal Productivity, 5 Exercises to Make Your Big Goal a Reality by Kate Arns. In this class, she talks about discomfort being a sign to reframe the way you're working towards your goals, identifying your zone of genius, removing life obstacles, validating your big idea, and creating an action plan. From this class, what I'm currently working through is taking inventory of my life and seeing where I have limitations or abundance. In this season of life with young children, there is a lot of chaos, but there definitely are areas of my life that I do have control over and I can alter the way I approach them, like adjusting the kids' nap schedules a little bit so there's more overlap when they're both sleeping, therefore more time I can put towards getting my work done. Thinking about our future can be very intimidating, but we can take the pressure off by starting small. Maybe you want to learn productivity tips like myself, or you want to start a new business, diversify your income, create confidence in the field that you're already working in. Whatever it is, Skillshare is here to help. So if you want to take ownership of your career path, redefine your work, or achieve a new goal, make sure to check out the link in the description. The first 1,000 of you to use that link will get a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. Thank you so much to Skillshare for being the sponsor of today's video. Now let's get into all the mistakes I've made in the garden in 2023. All right, the first thing that I did wrong was planting in mulch. I didn't think this would be a big deal because wood chips degrade into compost, so I thought my plants would like it, or at least it just kind of happened that way. As I've said prior, with my garden system, I have compost, then mulch from last year, and what I read in books, it told me to put more compost and more mulch on top this year. The problem with that was that there's a whole layer of mulch that wasn't decomposed that I put my compost on top of. So when I put my plants in the ground, they went in that layer of undecomposed mulch. And the reason why that's a problem is because, so I've learned, bark mulch actually soaks up all the nitrogen around it and holds it hostage so the plants can't access it. I wish I had known that prior, because now if I were to go back, I would pull back all the mulch that wasn't decomposed and add my compost and then put the mulch back on top. It's not a forever problem because the life cycle of this bark mulch is that it will degrade, and when it decomposes, all that nitrogen does get re-released into the soil, so it is good. You just don't want to plant your plants in the bark mulch. I've already seen the effects of this. My broccoli was starting to yellow and struggle, and cabbage. Both of those, the brassicas, are pretty heavy nitrogen feeders, so of course they would be hit by that. My peas also, just the other day I noticed, started to yellow. So, and yellowing could be a couple factors, but I am very certain it's nitrogen depletion. I'll get into that later. And yeah, I just wish that someone had told me a month or two ago that you're not supposed to plant in bark mulch. The next thing I didn't know is that apparently a lot of home gardeners have an oversupply of nutrients in their garden beds and they don't know that because they're, again, always told to add compost or fertilizer each year, and too many nutrients can harm your plants, but they also tend to leach off into the yard, into water courses. It's an environmental issue. Specifically, when you're adding just general fertilizer to your yard, you're adding, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and the phosphorus and potassium tend to build up in your garden because they're not used as much as the nitrogen is. So going forward, I will not necessarily be adding a bunch of compost to my garden beds every year because you don't actually know if your bed needs it or not. And what you're supposed to do, what I'm finally doing, is testing my soil to know what my garden needs, which was my third mistake, being not testing my soil. I ended up getting just a self-testing kit from Amazon. You can take a soil test and bring it to a lab, but it is cheaper to get these at-home kits. They're not as accurate, right? You don't get numbers, but you get the idea of like whether you're deficient or have too much nutrients. And so I did my soil tests. I found that my phosphorus and potassium were at good levels, which is great. And my nitrogen was quite depleted, which was such a shocker for me because I made this garden bed based on what these regenerative agriculture books told me to do. And not that they're wrong, but just every garden bed is different. So you should always be testing your own garden. But the reason I was confused is that I started my bed last year with compost and then added more compost this year. So how can I be nitrogen deficient? And I think it's, for one, the bark mulch, like I already said, and two, the way I set up my garden bed last year was the cardboard method, and my garden is on a little bit of a hill, just a little bit of a hill, but enough that when I would overwater it, which sometimes would happen because I used soaker hoses and would forget about it, the water would just float on top of that cardboard and pour off into our ditch. So the water wasn't actually sinking into the soil beneath that cardboard, and I'm pretty sure a lot of my nutrients were just being washed away. So the combination of those things weren't great, but I'm very glad that I got a soil test done so that I know that I don't have nitrogen. At this point, I'm not going to add more compost because I already have my bark mulch down, but I don't want to add chemical fertilizer. So what I've done is added blood meal around each plant, and I'm going to be adding it in the hole when I plant the rest of the veggie plants in there. Not ideal, but it is a more natural version of adding nutrients. I also don't want my plants to die or not produce from lack of nitrogen. So that's that. I also learned that you can overwater seedlings, which I guess sounds obvious, but I have zero experience starting seedlings in a greenhouse, and I got that little greenhouse for the first time this year. I've been learning a lot and making a lot of mistakes. I was so scared of my seedlings drying out that I would always keep water in the tray underneath my, what do you call those, little pots, whatever, can't think of the word. That caused a lot of my plants to be stunted, funny enough, and it took me a long time to figure it out because, again, I haven't done this before, so I didn't know what was right and what was wrong. Specifically, I'm trying to roast snapdragons, and I started them in February, and they still have only 2 true leaves, and it's May. So I did end up buying some starter plants from the nursery to put in my garden because I still want the flowers even if I wasn't able to grow them myself this year. But I'm not giving up on my snapdragons. I've let them dry out. The weather has gotten warmer. They seem happier. They're starting to grow again. And you can get really down about all this stuff, all the mistakes you've made when you feel like you've researched and you should have done better. But that's just like the name of the game. Everyone's environment is different, so it's hard to get clear cut, this is how you do it. Everyone kind of does things a little bit differently. That being said, no one should overwater their seedlings, but that's what I did. Okay, this is a big piece of information I did not know, and that is that peas don't necessarily nitrogen fix the soil to the extent that I thought. Everything you read online, if you just look up peas good for your garden, it'll say they nitrogen fix. They take nitrogen from the air and put it in the soil. But I've since learned that they do that, but then once they start flowering and fruiting, they use up most of that nitrogen that they've fixed to make their own pea pods. So you apparently are still getting some nitrogen in the soil, but it's not that significant. And the proper way to nitrogen fix your soil is to grow your peas, but kill them before, like, not kill them, but cut them down before they go to flower, so that all the nitrogen is left in the soil. So my whole crop rotation is still good. It's not as good as I thought it was with like the peas alternating and like bringing nitrogen for everyone. I think my plan now is I'm going to do a cover crop in the fall, grow a bunch of peas, cut them down before they flower, or like time it so that they die off from the frost or something. I don't know. I still want to use peas to nitrogen fix, but I just wasn't doing it correctly. Let me tell you about my carrots. I am going to do an update on my veggie garden, but to give you a little sneak peek, my burlap cover for my carrots did not work like I thought it would. So the idea was, carrots are hard to germinate because they can't dry out. I read online, can't trust the internet, put burlap down, it'll help protect the soil from direct sunlight, therefore reducing the amount that it dries out, letting your carrot seeds germinate. I threw so many seeds in the ground and I had like 2 come up for a couple reasons. One of them, I put too much bark mulch down in that section of the garden, and with wind and such, whatever animals, the bark mulch started covering my carrot seeds, and so they would die because they need to be barely covered with soil, if any at all. That's separate. The specific issue with the burlap is that it, protects it from the sun, but it's breathable, so the moisture could still evaporate out. I know people talk about using pieces of wood like 2x4s or 2x6s down on top of their seeds, because that actually will prevent the water from leaving your seeds unless the whole bed has dried out. So that's a great option for next year. I'm trying some other things right now as well, because I do have some seedlings in there still, so I can't just throw a log on there. But yeah, I don't think I'm gonna do burlap again. The last mistake I've made is a pretty tragic one, and that is, and maybe it's just for my environment, but that's putting my plants out too early, as in before they got big enough to withstand slugs. So I was putting my flower plants in the garden just based on like frost date, even if they were relatively small. Like I have a version of Baby's Breath that had 4 true leaves, so I'm like, okay, that's good to put out. But one slug comes along and eats the whole thing, and I cannot tell you how defeating that feels. When you have all these lovely plants that you started from seed, I felt so proud, and then you go out and half of them have been demolished. So if I had waited for them to get bigger, then they can handle a little bit of munching from slugs and not completely die off. That's really sad. I don't know if I'm gonna get any Baby's Breath this year. I've started a second round of seeds, but we'll see. I also threw some marigolds around that bed to act as a sacrificial plant. See if my Baby's Breath can come back, because there are some leaves still, but yeah, I really should have waited for them to be more established to put them in the garden. How's I supposed to know? So yeah, those are all the mistakes I've made as of May 3rd, 2023. It's funny, like I'm already so excited for next year because I've learned so much in the past few months. I want to actually use all that knowledge for the next season, but obviously we still have a big season ahead of us, and we're still gonna be fruitful, we're still gonna be flowerful. It's just quite a few hiccups along the way. I hope you've enjoyed this humbling video and maybe learned something to help you have a flourishing garden yourself. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.